Jinyi Zhao and her colleagues conducted 4 studies, including 2 field surveys and 2 experiments, and they found that the employees most adversely affected by stars were sometimes not the weakest performers, but rather those whose performance was relatively close to that star. That is, those who were almost right there at the same level. Pretty high performers in and of themselves. Those employees were more likely to compare themselves with the star, and that comparison was associated with some negative effects. Specifically, those people developed greater psychological entitlement, more counterproductive behavior, and lower well-being. The effects were stronger when the team's work was highly interdependent. Now, let me be careful not to overstate the findings of this study, because they didn't examine selfish stars either, and it does not show that supporting a high performer inevitably harms colleagues. However, it does demonstrate that stars affect an organization through more than their own output. Their status, their visibility, they shape how peers interpret fairness, recognition, and where they're standing within the group.
So the organization may believe it is rewarding and supporting one person, while also changing how everyone else sees the workplace and their place in it.
Right. And when we take these studies together, they suggest 3 things. First, star performance often depends heavily on the people and organization surrounding the individual. The environment is as important as the high performer's abilities. Hear that, folks. Second, collective performance depends on how effectively people combine their abilities, not simply on whether one person is extraordinary. And finally, concentrating attention and status around a star can negatively affect the motivation, behavior, and well-being of capable colleagues. The question is not whether an extraordinary person deserves support. It's whether supporting that person strengthens the organization or leaves everyone else working in the star's shadow.
Those studies really get us to what we need to talk. What do we do now? Now we know what we're talking about, but what do we do? So let's make this practical, because the first study you mentioned really suggests that the organization and the organizational structure is really tied to even high performers' performance. And to do that right will produce results that are incomparable to a poor organizational structure. So how do we do this right? How do we support high performers? But how do we not support difficult high performers inappropriately and make those ripple effects which undermine and destroy the rest of the organization?
Yeah, good question. On the last episode, our first step was a reframe, and so a little bit of the same thing here. The first step is to reframe how we're looking at things. Instead of focusing on what that high performer may accomplish if we give them more resources, we need to ask, again, this was at the end of the last episode, what will this investment make possible for everyone else? Will the person use the additional staff or the funding or whatever it is we're going to give them to strengthen the work of the group? Will they build up other people? Will the organization become more capable by doing this? Or are they just going to concentrate the resources to themselves? A collaborative high performer, which is what we want, they're going to use that additional support to build something that a lot of people can contribute to and benefit from, whereas that selfish high performer is probably going to use the same thing to expand their own control, their own status, their own independence. So what's going to be the outcome? We need to think about that as a first step.
Yeah, so leaders need to evaluate more than the projected return from the individual. And for this, we're talking about the high performer. They also need to consider what the investment in that high performer or any individual will do to the surrounding organization and team members.
Right. And the second step is to attach expectations to the support. We kind of hit on this a little bit last episode. Too often, organizations just give resources to a high performer without defining any expected outcomes, not setting responsibility beyond simply, quote, producing more. The person receives additional staff, they get more funding, they're protected, and the only expectation is that their individual numbers continue to rise. But institutional support should carry an institutional obligation. The leader might say, we're investing in your work because we believe it can advance the organization's mission. Part of that responsibility is helping others grow, contribute, be developed. We need you to share what you learn. We need you to build something that does not depend entirely on you. That doesn't diminish the individual performer's achievement. I mean, if anything, it elevates it. But it places that achievement in a context, and that context is in the organization, helping the organization be better, helping the organization to achieve its goals.
I think the expectations also need to be concrete. It can't be, like we said in the last episode, be a better team player. Otherwise, the person can continue producing individually while everyone assumes they are also strengthening the group.
Yeah, that happens so often. And to prevent it, leaders have to be looking for, and mentioned this in the last episode, observable evidence of impact. Are other people gaining opportunities, becoming more capable? Does the person give appropriate credit? Man, have I seen some credit hogs in my time? Can the work continue when that person is absent? As a leader, if you're building a system that depends on one person, where there's one point of failure, you've done a bad job. Let me just say that, okay? I'm just going to just set that right out there on the table. You got to be thinking about developing the depth of your organization, the people that you're leading. Are they getting better? Or is every important decision and relationship becoming increasingly dependent on this one person, your star, as it were?
Yeah, the real test in all of this is whether or not the organization becomes stronger in every sense of the word. Not the one person, like not their one individual production, but is the organization and all its team members, is the tide lifting all boats?
That may be the clearest test of all. If the investment is working well, that organization should become less dependent on any single person over time. But if each new investment makes the organization beholden to or reliant on one person, then that apparent growth may actually be increasing its vulnerability. And that brings us back to Barry Bonds. The Giants had every reason to support an extraordinary player. No question. The problem wasn't they invested in greatness. The problem was they catered to their selfish high performer, and they separated Bonds from the team. They allowed individual production to exempt him from shared expectations. He was seen as better than everybody else. Leaders should support extraordinary people. Don't mishear me, but that support should never compromise your mission. It should never make your people feel less than. It should never corrode your culture. It has to be building the whole group.